their availability is not in doubt, but whether we've identified sufficiently accurate and high-value targets, I think that's an open question.
It's likely that the decision will be to hit government ministries in and around Damascus and perhaps military installations as well, because targeting chemical sites would be far too risky.
When they bomb a chemical site, they're going to use overwhelming amounts of explosive. The idea is the explosion is so big that it will destroy the chemicals. However, some of that chemical weapon will disperse in the local area, and what we call the downwind hazard can be anywhere up to 1 or 2 kilometres, and people in that area, if they're exposed, again become casualties.
The greatest unknown is what could President Assad use in retaliation. Syria has a capable air force and a formidable battery of surface-to-air missile sites. These would come into play only if fighter jets were sent into Syrian airspace. Unlikely at this stage because it would be just simply too dangerous. It's not clear whether Russia delivered the S-300 ballistic missile equipment that Syria ordered. If so, then this could intercept any incoming missiles, but there have been reports in the past that the shipment was delayed by about a year or so.
Syrian army is much bigger, and if to take these anti-aircraft weapons, Syria has few times more, if to speak about numbers, of such weapons comparing with Libya.
Ultimately, much rests on what the eventual end game is. What do Washington and London want to achieve? That ambition will shape the resulting military action, which is looking pretty inevitable now, whatever form it might take. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News.
Well, I'm joined now here in the studio by Ammar Waqqaf, who's a Syrian political activist who largely opposes military action against Assad, and by Skype from Colorado in the United States, Rachel Kleinfeld, who's president of the Truman National Security Project. Very good evening to you both. Rachel Kleinfeld, can I start with you and ask you whether you feel that the evidence provided so far and rolled out by both the American and the British government is really sufficiently strong to justify the military intervention that is now being talked about more and more?
Well, there's strong evidence on the chemical weapons side that these were weaponized in a way that suggests the Syrian military sent them. But, you know, the real issue is that it was a specious red line. The real red line is that 120,000 Syrians have been killed. 20% of the country is now refugees. 1/5 of the population are refugees. The humanitarian disaster is immense, and that's being caused by the government. So what this particular chemical weapons red line that Obama drew is a little bit of a red herring. You have an enormous problem that's destabilizing the whole region and killing over 100,000 people.
Ammar Waqqaf, whether or not the chemical weapons use is a red herring, I mean, that is what both the White House and Downing Street seem to be saying is their entire focus. It's only whether they consider some sort of reaction to the use of chemical weapons, which they largely lay at the door of the Assad regime.
Well, I think there is a bit of jumping into conclusions that is deliberately being taken place. First of all, having a level of certainty about the usage of chemical weapons is being shifted towards having the same level of certainty about who used the chemical weapons. Nobody is arguing, nobody is asking any questions whether the rebels have the capability. We know the rebels have material, we know the rebels have the capability. In fact, the attack that is taking place isn't one that is synonymous with a Scud missile attack. It's more synonymous with 50 casualties here and 100 casualties there, with mortar bombs attack. And the rebels have more than enough capability of that. Now, if, for example, just for the sake of argument, it was actually the rebels or an offshoot of the rebels, you know, in Turkey in May 31st of this year, the Turkish authorities seized in Adana 2 kilograms of sarin gas with Jabhat al-Nusra, al-Qaeda affiliated group that are operating in Syria. Now suppose it was those people who carried out the attack. Would an intervention against the Syrian government be solving the problem, or would it be exacerbating the problem? I think that's the question for everyone.
Rachel Kleinfeld, what about military intervention? I mean, it's not an easy decision to be made. How specific would the targeting be? How effective could it be? And what are the dangers of escalating an already disastrous crisis in Syria?
Sure. Well, first, I think it's ridiculous to be arguing about who launched this attack. This is not 50 or 100 deaths. This is over 350 deaths, possibly up to 500, according to Doctors Without Borders, which is a very reputable, nonpartisan, non-affiliated group, and 1,300 people who appear to have symptoms of chemical attack. So this was a large-scale government attack. Now, in terms of military intervention, let's start by remembering that this isn't new. The U.S. is already involved in providing materiel to rebel groups. So is Saudi Arabia, so is Qatar, so is Turkey. Russia and Iran are providing a huge amount of materiel to the Syrian government. So this is already a conflagration with international forces deeply involved in this problem. The question is simply, will the US, the UK, France, possibly Germany, do an additional action because of this chemical attack? And it does look like they're looking at targeting. Now, my hope would be that when they look at targeting, they're looking at something that would change the equation on the ground and not just symbolic actions, similar to what Bill Clinton did against al-Qaeda during his presidency. There are real airfields that could be targeted. There are special forces that could be targeted of Assad's. There are much more useful targets that could help gain some humanitarian space.
Ammar Waqqaf, if the West decides that the case has been made, and you clearly don't believe it has and will no doubt argue that, but if they do, what impact do you think military intervention would have if it takes place? And is it going to prolong the conflict, or could it speed up the moment when sides will finally sit down and try and resolve this conflict through negotiation?
I think it would prolong the government, A, and B, it might spill into neighboring countries. But going back to the issue of being ridiculous in not really assessing the situation, I think the 2 kilograms, it's, you know, theoretically, the 2 kilograms that were seized in Turkey with Jabhat al-Nusra of sarin gas are more than capable of killing 4 million people. And if we're talking about hundreds of people being killed in Damascus, then I think we should really consider the amounts that the rebels have. But going back
hopefully the UN inspectors are going to resolve that for everybody by getting the evidence one way or the other. So, but you know,
the mandate. I think the mandate for the inspectors is to decide whether it was used or not. Jumping to who used it, and you know, intervening one way or the other without clear evidence is wrong. Now, the Syrian government, we don't know how they are going to retaliate. They might choose, along with their allies, to widen the circle a little bit. Now, are a few Tomahawk missiles capable of downing the regime? No. It will probably give hope, yes, to the rebels, telling them we're on your side and we're going to help you do this. But in my humble opinion, this is only going to prolong the issue more. This is not going to bring us any closer to any political solution. Now, let us remember there are factions within the rebel ranks that have no interest whatsoever in having a political dialogue with the government. They have their own jihadist and propagandist and ideological ideas where they should be, whether it's they should be in Damascus rather than the current government.
Ammar Waqqaf and Rachel Kleinfeld, I'm going to have to leave it there. I'm sure the debate is going to rage on for days. Thank you both very much.